Governor Mead?
Well, I'll give you a current perspective. I certainly think I would echo what has been said, and I would also say, the legislature, I think, does a very good job watching after that. Our collective savings in all the coffee cans in Wyoming are between $15 and $16 billion. And that's a remarkable thing for a state of 565,000 people. And I bet you can compare that to any other state in terms of population and savings, and we come out way on top. And so for the people in the mineral industry, for the leadership that saw the need for that many years ago, and then for the many legislatures and governors who have made sure that it stays on course, we're all there. It's all credit. I think it's as I look at my budget now, if you did not have that, we would be looking at Governor Sullivan, I hate to think about wishing a lot of people die, but I mean, there's just no way to we couldn't even begin to balance a budget without the mineral wealth that we've had. So,
the back to your comment about Ernest Wilkerson, Republicans outnumber Democrats in Wyoming about 3-1. Has the Democratic Party ceased to be relevant in running government in Wyoming?
I don't know about relevant, but I'll talk about relevance.
Excuse me, yes.
Let me just say before I answer that question, because I don't really want to answer the question, I want to toss one to Bob, who's the voice, the voice. And he really ought to be the one up here being interviewed because he's worked both sides of the aisle and has been involved in many more campaigns than even Al, and has been really, really important to Wyoming. And I think we're fortunate to have him here and his contribution.
Thank you.
Now, what was your question?
Yeah, what was the question? Yeah, sure.
Well, let me just go back. I don't think it's in my position to say whether the Democratic Party is or should be. You all can see what's before you. But I would hearken back to the early days of the Wyoming legislature when the only Democrat was Thurman Arnold, who went on to Washington to become the greatest trust buster and Justice Department official that had ever hit the Justice Department, but he was the only, as I recall, Democratic legislature in the legislature, and called a caucus one day in the phone booth outside the chambers, announced a caucus. So all I can say is what goes around comes around.
I'm wondering, Al, if your dad would recognize the political landscape in Wyoming and find you today about where it was in the days in the governor's office.
What it was?
Yeah.
My dad's?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, Dad was a tough guy. He was born in Jackson, like Cliff was. He was captain of the football, basketball, and baseball at the University of Wyoming, all three sports. Tough, prize fighter. Member of the United Mine Workers when he worked over in Red Lodge one summer. And when he was governor, he knew he had the hammer in his hand, and he used it. And it got him in a lot of trouble. And they took it out on him. Joe Hickey, wonderful guy. Win Hickey was a legislator here. I learned my craft because I was in the Democrat-controlled legislature in 1965. The Speaker of the House was Walter Phelan, a Democrat from Cheyenne. And that's where you learn how to legislate. How do you work with the other side? And when you work with the other side, you can get every success you can imagine. Ted Kennedy and I worked on stuff. I don't agree with him, don't live his life, but when we shook hands, that was it. And that's all I ever looked for. I didn't care. I don't judge people's lifestyle or their morals. That's some other judge somewhere. But as a legislator, I'm looking for the guy to legislate with, and he was an extraordinary legislator. And Dale Bumpers, and I worked with presidents, Carter and Bush and Clinton and, you know, Reagan, a delight. I've had that privilege. But when Dad refused to change the road, that they were doing the highway through Buffalo and Sheridan, and the government was putting up 93% of the bucks, and they said, we're going to put the interchange in Buffalo. And the people of Sheridan came over and said, you're going to what? Buffalo is a jerkwater place, and Sheridan is the queen of northern Wyoming, and therefore you're going to put it there. He said, look, the government's paying for it. I don't have any say. And they said, you're the governor. You can change it. He said, I can't, and I'm not. And then he wasn't in favor of capital punishment. So I remember I came over, I was in law school, when the Sheridan delegation came in to see him. There were about 10 of them. I can remember their names and their faces. They're all dead now, so I can speak clearly. They sat in the governor's office, and Dad he pulled the curtain back there. You know, there was a curtain back there. And I sat there, and they said, Governor, you know, you still have the opportunity to change that. And if you don't, you know, it could be very difficult in your wife's home county, which was Sheridan. You could even lose. And Dad said, he listened for about 10 minutes. I'm behind that curtain. He said, could you say that a little clearly, a little more clearly? Yes, you would probably be defeated. He said, are you telling me that if I don't change that you guys will defeat me? Well, get your ass out of here and go to work. And man, I tell you, they were furious, and boy, they went to work. But I was so proud of my old man. I thought, that's the way to do the business. And that's what he did. But he was direct. Hathaway was like that. Guts, old bomber pilot, you know, he didn't take a crap off anybody. And Herschler, well, the worst day of Ed's was when they asked him to meet with a Japanese delegation. And he said, I'm not going to meet with a Japanese delegation. They shot me over there in Guadalcanal. I really don't care to see any of them again. They said, but you're the governor now, and you will see them. And he said, well, bring them in. So in they came, the delegation. There was one journalist. You remember this, Mike? You don't want to believe this, but you do. So this guy said, how old are you? And the guy said 63 or whatever. He said, you're just my age. Were you ever in the service? Yeah, I was. I was in the Japanese, 3rd Regiment. He said, were you on Guadalcanal or where, Coral Island? The guy said, yeah. He said, were you in so-and-so? He said, yeah. He said, you saw a picture of the guy that shot me. That delegation did not go well. But that was Ed Herschler, and he was the longest serving government in our history. 12 years. He was just what people loved. 2 fingers of red eye at night, and tell stories, smoke Camels 3 packs a day. And I was privileged, as Mike was, to give the eulogy of his service.
Hi-oh.
Since Al didn't answer your question, let me try to do it. The question was whether his dad
If you can't talk.
would recognize the governor's office and its issues today. And I would just say, when I hadn't been in office more than 6 weeks, and Al sent me an article that his dad wrote while he was governor, which I carried around in my briefcase for the rest of my 8 years, which outlined the issues that he faced. And to the best of my memory, I'll recite them. Education, economic development, mineral development, environmental considerations, and 1 or 2 others. And they weren't a bit different than the issues that I was addressing at that time, nor much different than the issues that Governor Mead is addressing today. It is Wyoming, and the issues have been much the same. I'd have to say the zeros have changed a bit in the budget. But the stresses and the strains are much the same. One other quick anecdote that reflects one of the other lessons I learned from Jim Baker, one of Al's friends who was Secretary of State and Secretary of Treasury. He said one time that his motto was, never burn any bridges in politics, because you never know when you have to cross back over that bridge. And that's in spades in Wyoming. And the anecdote I want to say is when I was in high school in Douglas, Wyoming, my dad was a lawyer. He had been county attorney, but he was practicing privately at the time. And a young man, 18 years old, came through Manville or Keyline, Wyoming, and went to rob a guy who'd parked his truck next to the road and ended up shooting him, killing him. My dad defended him. My dad lost the trial, lost the appeal, and the young man was sentenced to death. He didn't die, and he ultimately left prison because Al's dad commuted his sentence and then got beat for his position on capital punishment. 30 years later, I had to decide on my position on capital punishment. That certainly informed my view, but it didn't control my view. But the circles in Wyoming are so small and so continuous, just as they are in this room, that we should never forget that we're all in it together.
Salud.
Delivered. And he talked about keeping young people in Wyoming, economic development, minerals, the environment, and diversity of our economy. And I use that speech. I take captions out of it, and it's, you change the dates, and it's still relevant today. And, there is, some people get frustrated on that, but to me, there is some amount of comfort in knowing that this is Wyoming, and these are the issues that we need to deal with. And you can reach back in time and see how other governors addressed it, or members of the legislature addressed it. And also, I can call Governor Sullivan, or Governor Friedenthal, Governor Geringer, and say, what did you do on this issue? And that's nice to have that level of experience. I mentioned my first comment about the picture that I had of Governor Sullivan and my mom dancing together. One of the other reasons I keep it there is just what Governor Sullivan was saying. It is a close community, and Governor Sullivan, I've reached out to him for advice, and he's given me advice. And that is such a remarkable thing about Wyoming, that connectedness. And the same with Al. Anytime you want to call these folks, they've lived through these issues, they're willing to give their help. And even though our families have run against each other at different times, to be able to know that they will do that and do it willingly and in good spirit, a wonderful thing. And I think sometimes in Wyoming we think our population is a disadvantage, but our small population is a tremendous advantage because we do know each other, that we do know each other.